Hello, I'm Sanjay Pulipaka. Welcome to the latest edition of Global Perspectives, where we engage with eminent scholars on political, economic, and other contemporary issues. Today, we have with us Dr. Seong-Hyon Lee. He's a senior fellow at George Bush Foundation for U.S China Relations. He is a visiting scholar at the Harvard University's Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies. He is a former director for Center for Chinese Studies at Sejong Institute, and he's also the director at the Department of Unification Studies. Professor Lee was a recipient of many fellowships, scholarship, and he's also the author of a very famous book, the U.S China Competition, Who Will Rule the World? Professor Lee will explain to us the recent trends in South Korea's foreign policy and its latest Indo-Pacific policy. Professor Lee, welcome to the Global Perspectives. It must be very cold out there in Boston. How is Boston treating you? How is the weather there?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm enjoying the weather here in Boston. We tend to have a lot of snow during the winter, and my family loves the snow. Oh, by the way, today, as you know, I'm not a diplomat or politician, even though I have friends in that sector. Being an academic pushes me to look at things a little bit more critically. So I'm not here to criticize or praise the policy document. I know we're going to talk about Indo-Pacific strategy of South Korea. But overall, I'm here to share my personal views on the matter as an academic. So that's the caveat there.
Thank you. Thank you for that observations. In your writings in the past, 2-3 years ago, you had mentioned that South Korea is in search of a new identity as a middle power. Do you think this Indo-Pacific strategy document is part of this ongoing search for new identity, or does it culminate? Does this Indo-Pacific security document culminate or end this journey in search of a new identity?
Well, that's an interesting way to start this conversation. I don't want to sound too philosophical in talking about a national policy document, but I think life is a journey, as you know, for individuals, but also for countries as well. So I tend to see this another step in South Korea's journey, long process of national identity evolution based on different visions to meet new and different challenges. And I think this is a work in progress. And actually, when I read the document, it looks like this is a work in progress as well.
Various countries have articulated their respective Indo-Pacific strategies. And yet, after so many years, South Korea articulated its Indo-Pacific strategy, it attracted considerable global attention. What prompted South Korea to come up with this Indo-Pacific strategy document now, and what explains the growing interest in the Indo-Pacific region?
Mm-hmm. Well, the way I see it, I think there are two aspects to it. One is, United States. After their summit between President Joe Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol in May last year, South Korea said that it would plan to issue an South Korea's own Indo-Pacific strategy by the year's end. So in a way, it was partly fulfilling that goal, and also partly to keep in step with the United States as its ally. And South Korea actually, in the past had the so-called New Southern policy in the previous Moon Jae-in administration, during which the government said it would find a common ground between South Korea's policy and U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. This government, the Yoon administration, upgraded it with also a specific name that includes Indo-Pacific, and further integrated in more in lockstep with U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. Second, I personally would like to call this South Korea's coming out declaration to the world. This needs explanation. this is the first time for South Korea to publicly declare that it will join the rules-based international order, play its part, and contribute to the international community. Although this sounds a bit very commonsensical, but as a member of international community, as India belongs to and also South Korea belongs to, but the fact of the matter is that South Korea has never done that before in a comprehensive policy document. So very surprising, given that South Korea is the world's 10th largest economy and the 6th largest, powerful military power. But this is, we never done that before. So South Korea has long been, in a way, constrained, or it feels constrained by the geopolitics of the Korean Peninsula, namely North Korea. The DMZ, the 38th parallel that separates the two Koreas, are the world's most heavily militarized place with the most number of landmines. And South Korea is a divided country facing its military threat right across the DMZ, which is just a 30-minute drive from downtown Seoul. So South Korea's 90% of South Korea's diplomacy, in fact, in the past has been, it's about de facto, about dealing with North Korea directly or indirectly. So South Korea felt that before we do anything about in the world, we need to first solve the North Korean issue. That's the mindset that has constrained or straitjacketed South Korea's hands. But then North Korean issue, as you know, doesn't go away. It's a here and now. So South Korea decided to embrace North Korean issue as it is, and at the same time, go beyond North Korea, looking beyond the Korean Peninsula for the first time in history. It is like South Korea saying that I'm going to be a global actor. I'm going to work with more countries, network with a more number of countries, cooperate with them, find new friends, explore areas of cooperation, and so on. So I personally call it South Korea's coming out doctrine, first time in its history in the format of a document.
In addition to being a coming out strategy, a strategy that encapsulates the desire to come out of the Korean Peninsula, could you list out for us one or two or three core principles or components of the South Korean Indo-Pacific strategy?
Well, the document has 33 pages, and this is where things are a little bit technical, and it has a vision, 3 visions, as you mentioned. Specifically, it's freedom, peace, and prosperity. And it also has a principle of inclusiveness, trust, and reciprocity, and has 9 core lines of effort. And it's very generic in a way: promote the rule of law, expand the cooperation in the region, promote mutual understanding, promote the rule of law. And it's generic and abstract, and it has all the big words. And I could see that they want to be comprehensive, because this is the first step document for South Korea to do so. But then the problem is that when you want to be comprehensive, you compensate focus. So it's more of a principle document. It's more of a vision document. And I think that they are right now working on the details to further fine-tune the specific project this year.
You seem to be saying that it's a document that is still evolving, where they are going to fine-tune the details as they go along. In addition to rule of law issues, there seems to be a lot of emphasis on economics. We know South Korea is an economic powerhouse. Perusal through the Indo-Pacific strategy document shows a lot of data points and graphs. Do you think economics and trade seems to have played a more important role in defining this strategy than geopolitics? or do you think it is imprudent to put the strategy document into these silos or tight compartments, so to speak?
That's an interesting question. That also shows that you read the document very carefully, even more so than most Koreans, actually. And I agree with you. And it has some backstory. When South Korea last year started working on Indo-Pacific strategy, at the same time, they also began to work on IPAF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Naturally, there are overlapping of researchers who are economists who are working simultaneously on the two projects. After all, IPAF is the economic pillar of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. So they are organically connected to each other. And secondly, I think there is a timing factor. South Korea, just like many other countries like India as well, or China or United States, is recovering from the pandemic. And its priority right now is economy. And I think that is also reflected in the thinking. And actually, President Sejong said many times that at the center of every foreign policy item this year, make economy at the center of our South Korea's diplomacy. Having said that, on the whole, I, however, still think that it is more of a security strategy document, although it may not look that way or that obvious. And it's because of, they want to be, comprehensive, and they compensated the focus.
Earlier, you said that this is sort of a document or a strategy that visualizes that South Korea will come out of the Korean Peninsula dynamic. What has been the response, domestic response, to the Indo-Pacific strategy? How have the opposition party responded, the academics and others, how have they responded? Is there a consensus on the Indo-Pacific strategy among the major stakeholders, domestic stakeholders?
Overall, domestic response is welcoming. And actually, they expected from a new government, because each new government issues its own vision statement, its new strategy in a sense. However, the most prominent and conspicuous concern overall raised was about China. What does South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy mean to China? And simply put, South Korea is in a position that wants to find a way to strengthen its alliance with the United States without provoking China. So that is the thinking behind this strategy.
In continuation of what you just said about its relationship with United States, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy document reflects our shared commitment to the region's security and growing prosperity. How do you think the Indo-Pacific strategy document will help or will impact the triangular relationship between United States and Japan in the region?
Well, I think you are adding your own analysis in that. And I agree with you that the U.S. immediate interest with the South Korea's this strategy document is that deepening cooperation and coordination in the trilateral security structure that includes Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. And actually, the document mentions about Japan, but does not talk very much about it. So that's why I think it's important to pay attention to what is written, at the same time, what is not written. I think the current South Korean government is much more ready for the trilateral security cooperation than the previous South Korean government. And the U.S. has been making a great deal of effort to have its two Asian allies to get along better. And I think Washington is making a good progress on this.
A related question to that. On one hand, for South Korea, you have your alliance with United States. On the other, you have this big neighbor in China. What has been the response in China to the Indo-Pacific strategy of South Korea? I mean, how has the Beijing responded, the academics, the media community there? I mean, you have studied China very closely. In fact, you lived there. You know a lot more about China's external engagement. So we would like to know from you what has been the response of the Indo-Pacific, South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy in China, and what would
right. The official response came from China's foreign ministry, and foreign ministry said, somewhat expectedly, that China opposes exclusive small grouping and hopes the South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy to contribute to global peace. So obviously, this it shows us China is not too excited about it, because it shows that South Korea is getting close to the side of the United States. Also, that means that away from China in a sense. And I think your bigger question is also important, that, and we can talk about South Korea-China relation for hours on this session, but given the time constraint, let me share with you what I think is the larger picture in my own style. And I think that South Korea-China relations are at a crossroads. Let me explain. The deep economic complementarity that previously characterized the close South Korea-China relations is no longer there. Accusations of cultural and historical appropriation have significantly undermined confidence between the two civil societies, and the anti-China sentiment among South Koreans has been unprecedentedly high since the Tet dispute, especially among young South Koreans. A sense of incompatibility with China's political system is widening. In the security realm, South Korea's high hopes for China to render a constructive role in containing North Korea's nuclear and missile belligerence are becoming less tenable. And as China regards the United States, not North Korea, as a bigger existential threat. So, and on top of that, the U.S.-China rivalry is going to severely constrain South Korea's choices, including semiconductor supply chains, and while posing fresh challenges such as tension building in the Taiwan Strait. The Indo-Pacific strategy document says, we are not alienating China. It mentions that China as a major cooperation partner, but it doesn't mention what South Korea will do when cooperation with the United States becomes incompatible with cooperating with China.
Since you are mentioning U.S.-China dynamic here, what do you think? If you have to do some sort of crystal ball gazing and sort of predicting, how do you think, what are the possible trajectories in U.S.-China relationship in the coming future?
I think we are at the very early stage of U.S.-China rivalry, which will unfold for the coming 3 decades at least, for the foreseeable future. And for the last few years, the two sides have been each gearing up for and preparing for this long-haul competition. And there will be ups and downs in their relationship, but the overall trajectory, the way I see it, is very clear. It'll get worse before it'll get better. And China used to see as a developing, China as a developing country in the past, used to see the United States as an obstacle to avoid, because China was weaker. But now China has become stronger than before, and now China sees the United States as a challenge to overcome on its way to becoming the great, realizing the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, to realize what Chinese leader Xi Jinping called Chinese dream. So China is on a path to a journey as well, just like South Korea is on a journey with this new strategic document as well. And between U.S. and China rivalry, South Korea is tormented soul. It is often referred to as a shrimp that is stuck between the two giant whales. So South Korea is definitely in a difficult spot.
In addition to the challenges that you mentioned, I think you are also dealing with various other global challenges. I mean, not just South Korea, many other countries are dealing with, for instance, the Ukraine crisis and its implications for the rest of the world. South Korea is an ally of United States. How has this conflict impacted your foreign policy? Has South Korea provided military assistance to Ukraine? What is the mood in South Korea on these issues, especially among the foreign policy circles? Is there a concern that United States attention is getting diverted from the larger East Asian region or Indo-Pacific region to more of Europe or transatlantic relationships?
Well, I think that there is a concern from South Korea's geopolitical position that when U.S. is preoccupied in Europe in Ukraine crisis, also U.S. is also preoccupied with Taiwan issue. U.S. is preoccupied in dealing with China and Russia. And there is a missing security agenda that is North Korea. What I'm hearing from Washington is that, last year, North Korea has conducted more number of missile tests in a single year than any other in previous years. So North Korea's provocation is increasing. But given the U.S. preoccupation with the Ukraine and other areas that I mentioned, 70% of U.S. policy resources and energy is focused on Ukraine, Taiwan, and China, and the rest of 30%, occupies the rest of the world. And North Korea, despite its increasing provocative acts, only occupies a very small portion of U.S. interest and U.S. attention. And what South Korea, from geopolitical perspective, worries about is that what if the China attacks Taiwan, and North Korea, as an ally of China, also simultaneously attacks South Korea, and the U.S. forces may have a difficult time in dealing with two war fronts, both happening simultaneously in Taiwan and also on the Korean Peninsula. So that's something that South Korean strategists are thinking about these days and worrying about these days.
It's interesting you mentioned about this two-front conflict, one in Taiwan, the other in Korean Peninsula, and the concerns about U.S. commitment to the Korean Peninsula issues. This takes us to the larger issue of South Korean strategy, military strategy. We have heard in the recent past, current president of South Korea mentioning, or he was cited as saying that South Korea has a nuclear option in case of a serious crisis. Do you think he was cited correctly in this issue, or is there a genuine conversation going on in Korean Peninsula, especially in South Korea, that it's time to at least reflect, if not go nuclear?
Well, I cannot answer the question because I don't have a mobile phone number of President Yoon Suk-yeol and what exactly he is thinking. Having said that, I think President Yoon, after saying that, he also paddled back. He kind of tried to minimize his statement, but nonetheless, he is the first South Korean president to publicly suggest this course of action that when the necessity of having nuclear weapons someday far into the future as a possibility. So history will remember him for that. But then, as you alluded, there is anxiety among the South Korean public watching what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Taiwan. Also, Russian President Putin mentioned possibility of using nuclear weapons. So South Korea is also facing security dilemma in dealing with nuclear-armed North Korea. So South Korean public has become much more worried about this security dilemma, with North Korea, and also at the same time the whole global uncertainty environment. And currently, South Korea has a so-called nuclear umbrella, nuclear protection coming from the United States. But people are raising the question, what if there is a hole in the U.S. nuclear umbrella? Can we trust 100% in case of contingency? And I think that President Yoon is in a way reflecting that public sentiment in a way to reassure them by raising this agenda publicly and signaling to the U.S. government that, hello, friend, we have this kind of anxiety among this public, and they want a more assurance. And I think that it will be much more helpful. U.S. government, Washington could also signal to Seoul that we have these measures and ways of cooperation that can protect South Korea from the possible any nuclear provocations. And as an ally, you could trust us. So I think this is the background of what I think Yoon said. But having said that, I don't think Yoon said in a very serious way. It's more about posturing, more about signaling. I think South Korea, for the foreseeable future, in the future, will continue to abide by the current global trend of nuclear non-proliferation. I think that's the trend that South Korea will pursue as a government.
You just mentioned that President Yoon was one of the first leaders, South Korean leaders, to suggest publicly the possibility of reflecting on nuclear options. Do you think Yoon's foreign policy is qualitatively different from the earlier President Moon Jae-in's foreign policy? Is it the difference? Is it substantive or is it rhetorical?
You're right. Some people argue that, after all, President Yoon's pursuit of a number of policies, including particularly a close relationship with the United States, is actually not a change from the past, but actually Yoon is building on steps from the former President Moon Jae-in took to strengthen the U.S.-Korea alliance throughout, when Moon Jae-in, was a president, throughout during 2020 and 2021. Personally, I have some issues with that interpretation because my observation was slightly different. I think the previous government was also rhetorically emphasized alliance with the United States, but this is more like rhetorical statement in a way to induce U.S. cooperation on the South Korea's priority of dealing with North Korea, particularly engagement with the North Korean leadership of Kim Jong-un. This new government, they also emphasize alliance with the United States, but I think that for the first time in South Korean history, I could feel that, see that, they really emphasize the value diplomacy, value networking with the United States. And I think that there are qualitative differences between the two administrations in South Korea.
Listening to you, some of the major challenges that you have listed include the challenges in the Korean Peninsula, the concerns about U.S. alliance framework, In addition to these challenges, what are the one or two other challenges that you see for South Korean foreign policy? And on the other hand, what are the opportunities for South Korea in looking into the future, near future?
I think the answer is obvious. It's South Korea's very polarized domestic politics. I understand that India also has a very robust domestic political debate as a democracy, which is very natural. South Korea, on the other hand, also has its own version of a very robust, perhaps too much robust and too polarizing domestic politics in terms of looking at how to approach North Korea's nuclear issue, how we should go about our economic policy or domestic policy. So I think that South Korea's, unity, political unity will be a key to meet future challenges. At the same time, also take advantage of new opportunities that arise in the future as well.
It's interesting that you mention India. I mean, going through the Indo-Pacific strategy document, South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy document, India and Indian Ocean get referred to almost a dozen times, or to be precise, 11 times. Do you foresee that South Korea will scale up the efforts it is making to build relationship with India?
As you know, I'm not the most qualified person to answer this question because I'm not expert on the Korea-India relations. However, I know that India is South Korea's seventh largest export market, and there is an enormous potential for improved trade and bilateral relations, as well as cultural exchanges. And as a scholar, I personally hope to see more academic exchanges, more student exchange between the two nations so that we could find more areas of cooperation, explore more projects that we could do together.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. In addition to economic relations, there is an urgent need for greater academic exchange between the two countries, get to know each other more. And of course, new projects. But for us in India, South Korea has a big presence. Your companies are visible everywhere in the market. But to take your point on academic exchanges and developing some sort of a shared worldview on how things should be, I agree with you on that. On that positive note, I thank you for participating in this Global Perspectives program. We look forward to interacting with you in future. I thank you for taking out time, sharing your views on complex issues pertaining to global politics, and more importantly, the Korean Peninsula. Thank you, Professor Lee.
Well, likewise, thank you so much. And also thank you so much for raising many challenging questions and issues that, I may not have fully answered and satisfied your questions, but I tried my best. And also, it was a very educational experience for me to think about these issues and think deeper. And I'll continue to think about these issues and share my ideas with you in the future as well. Thank you.
On that positive note, we conclude this edition of Global Perspectives. We will meet again soon. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and good luck.